answer to that basic question. What is net neutrality? Net neutrality ensures that cable companies can't interfere with the information we put out and receive on the internet. It also means keeping cable companies from charging customers for access to information. Tim Wu discusses in The Master Switch how cable exists because there was a lack of options for broadcast television, which used to be the most important media. This problem of access affected most Americans in rural, urban, and suburban areas. Cable was created to serve that underserved part of the market. Cable, as Wu puts it, was born commercial, with a consciousness of how to be profitable, while the internet was born with no revenue model. This is why, though cable started out revolutionary, like the internet, in the 1960s and 70s, by the 1980s it was as corporate and enterprising as the domineering telephone and broadcast companies. This corporate business style is why Wu does not describe it as an open system. Cable companies are instead closed systems. As internet service providers, or ISPs, the cable companies can dictate what we see and access as consumers. This enables them to not only further their monopoly on the cable industry, but if they were able to control the open systems of the internet, they could either charge exorbitant prices for access to those things, or simply prohibit them in general. Challenging the control of the ISPs are companies like Google. Those companies focus on specialization of a specific role instead of attempting to control access to the internet itself. They therefore thrive and function on the assumption that net neutrality exists, because they were created within the framework of an open internet. They don't need to compete with ISPs because they simply are not ISPs. They do not fulfill the same role. However, ISPs like Comcast, which is now connected to NBC, a news conglomerate, can disapprove of companies like Google because Google, being untethered from huge industry controllers, has no obligation to fulfill any media biases. This means that they can show news that Comcast or NBC may not like. Another thing cable companies want to control is sports networks, which is why they use vertical integration to try and buy out networks with sports networks. The cable companies see it as in their best interest to restrict the capabilities of those companies by slowing down access to them for their customers until the companies consent to whatever the cable companies want. It's the cable version of a mafia shakedown. The FCC is in place to police the cable companies and ensure that all relations between ISPs and internet companies are fair and do not come at a detriment to the people. However, cable companies are able to lobby the FCC constantly. The current commissioner of the FCC, Tom Wheeler, used to be a top lobbyist for the cable industry. As John Oliver put it,
"That is the equivalent of needing a babysitter and hiring a dingo."
Oliver ended his now famous rant about net neutrality by imploring internet users to attack the FCC's website with comments requesting that they ignore any of Wheeler's ideas about allowing fast lanes. It worked. After opening for comment on May 15, 2014, the FCC's website crashed after being inundated with 3 million comments. But did those comments do anything? Can they do anything? Arguably not. Since the FCC is a rule-making board instead of a democratically appointed one, they have no obligation to fulfill democracy, aka adhere to what the general public wants. The newly formed Comcast company would be able to tell customers exactly what they want to hear in order to lure them in. Comcast wants to enable themselves to provide as much channels to their subscribers as possible. Therefore, this would make it less enticing for you to want to switch companies. Although the company might have ownership of the largest high-speed internet connections, it still would not give subscribers the option of skipping all advertisements. Some might think that this would not affect them, because they stream their television shows through sources such as Netflix, TiVo, and internet websites, because paying $75 a month on cable is too much. By using Netflix and TiVo, TV streamers are already able to skip commercials. However, if Comcast is able to make itself the biggest power at the table, then this would grant them more bargaining power over internet platforms and program networks, which could eventually pose a threat to your accessibility to Netflix, TiVo, and internet streaming, since the same company also controls your data. The other already small cable companies have already been victims of not being a number one due to the high retransmission consent fees that they are forced to pay. As a result, their profit margins plummet, and they have to cut back on channels, which causes them to lose subscribers. Comcast doesn't want to take over the cable business. Instead, it wants to make itself the middleman and force everyone to pay a toll on their road. It just so happens that Comcast will be controlling all the cable routes due to the fact the merger will leave them as a number one cable provider. Companies would not have a choice but to agree to the merger, since they will be controlling nearly 30% of cable in American homes and 40% of all internet services. Although Comcast may say that they are interested in cross-promotion deals with other companies, this doesn't mean that anything is working out in favor of the other company. In 2008, the FCC sanctioned Comcast for violating net neutrality. The FCC found that Comcast had intentionally slowed traffic to the BitTorrent file-sharing website. They urged Comcast to stop this practice. Comcast appealed this sanction to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which overturned the decision because the court claimed that the FCC had overstepped their boundaries. The FCC has tried to impose rules requiring internet providers to offer equal treatment to all web traffic in order to maintain net neutrality. However, the FCC has also kept their roles of authority vague in the hopes of creating growth in the internet market. The FCC had signaled that instead, internet service providers would be allowed to charge consumers for a faster connection. The FCC can still protect the internet and avoid the monopoly, but to do so, broadband internet carriers have to be classified as telecommunication services, according to the 1996 Telecommunications Act. While perhaps a pastime of the generations before us, the Saturday morning cartoon marked the beginning of every weekend for children all across America. From 8 a.m. to noon every Saturday, kids would tune in to the three network giants, CBS, ABC, and Fox, to see their favorite shows. Each decade, a new generation would flock to their TVs to see what shows would become the next big broadcasts. In the 1960s, the cartoons were either of superheroes adapted from comics such as Spider-Man or musician-based shows like the Jackson 5. The 1970s brought a significant change in the content shown. There was a great outcry against cartoon violence and what seemed like moral ambiguity in some of the shows. Lobby groups, especially Action for Children's Television, gained a lot of power over the 2 decades, and eventually television networks began to create more stringent regulations on the content released by animation houses. This would leave a great strain on the studios that would eventually lead to the demise of the Saturday morning cartoon. Content of the 1980s became more fairy tale-esque, with shows that were also franchised off, like My Little Pony and The Smurfs. Many animation studios were heckled to create more and more programs without a lot of resources and time, and many eventually quit or went on strike. And by the 1990s, networks began to take cartoon time slots off the air and replace them with news. Cartoons became simple reboots of older works, and cartoon-dedicated networks like Cartoon Network, Disney, and Nickelodeon became the go-to channels for animated series. By the 2000s, television networks opted to show debatably educational TV shows in place of cartoons, and morning news shows gained more attention. The Saturday morning cartoon was coming to an end, and the big networks didn't really care to stop it. On October 4th, 2014, the last Saturday morning cartoon block was aired, and an era had ended. The rise of the internet and the ability of people, especially children in this case, to choose what they watch and when, the Saturday morning cartoon became unnecessary. But where can we go now to get our animation fix? Well, there's always the cartoon-dedicated channels like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and with the increase of streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and even YouTube, cartoons are easier to obtain than ever. Despite the number of hours of television intake still increasing, probably due to routine and tradition, Netflix has allowed consumers to take charge of their viewing options, which has been the real game changer. Because of recommendation algorithms and personal endorsements, through Twitter and Facebook, Netflix has allowed online viewership to dictate popularity based on their loyalty to their interests and obsessions, removing the externally imposed schedule previously held by cable networks. In the digital age, the television and entertainment industry values timeliness as new is better than old. Live triumphs, pre-recorded, original episodes always beat reruns, which is apparent in the Netflix age, where shows like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black make an entire season of episodes available on the same day. Netflix has not only followed us to feel like our viewing is tailored to our interests, but also has actually put the viewer in control. Netflix uses their numbers and ratings as indicators for popularity. They saw how popular Kevin Spacey movies were rated with 4 to 5 stars, and how popular David Fincher films like Fight Club and The Social Network were, who became the director and producer of the first season of House of Cards. So we're not flipping channels looking for things to watch anymore. Television is literally being programmed and tailored to meet our interests. Instant gratification and immediate access have become the ruling standard. With no ads, the ability to watch at any time of day, and the choice to binge watch hours of a series in one sitting, vastly different from when shows were designed to keep the viewer so engaged in each episode that if you missed one episode, you would lose an entire aspect of the plot in the long run. Now, we can pause the show in the middle to get food, rewatch funny parts, and skip the opening credits when they take too long. Especially since advertising rules the networks, comparative popularity and ratings matter a lot, because this is what dictates the prices charged for ad spots. This desire to be current is the marketing tactic that Wu attributes to Netflix's shift from simply a new media venture to an actual network, completely redefining the meaning of an entire culture revolving around evening routines and the TV as the centerpiece of our homes that network television created. And it may be surprising to know that television remains the dominant medium, as only 45 minutes of a 5-hour chunk of time spent watching shows is from internet streaming. And there are still more cable subscriptions than Netflix users, roughly 50 million compared to 36 million in the US. However, premium cable network subscriptions are down 4% in the last year, while online streaming subscriptions are up about 3% from last year. Streaming services like Netflix clearly pose a threat to cable providers. Comcast and Verizon accused of slowing down bandwidth for Netflix users, causing slow loading and buffering. Netflix is currently 34% of internet traffic downloaded during the peak evening hours in the United States, a little over a third of all internet traffic.